Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're planning a truly deep, in-depth, and detailed descent into a work it's less a book and more a kind of psychological and philosophical labyrinth.
Soren Kierkegaard's monumental Eidherer.
Exactly. And you have brought us just this incredible stack of sources detailing its extraordinary architecture, its context, and of course, its central, unavoidable confrontation.
It's one of those texts where you can't just analyze the philosophy, you have to explore the whole existential crisis being played out on the page. Our real goal here is to make this dense, multi-layered work accessible,
Right.
but without losing its profound complexity. We need to be thorough, but the insights have to stay clear for you.
That's the challenge, isn't it? The mission is to unpack these two radically different worldviews. They're presented by these two pseudonymous authors, A and B.
Who embodies the aesthetic life on one hand and the ethical life on the other.
And it forces this central provocative question on us, on you, the listener. How should one actually exist?
Do you live a life constantly pursuing the interesting, avoiding commitment, always seeking novelty? That's A, the aesthete. He's like this fragmented artist of existence.
Or do you embrace responsibility? Do you root yourself in duty, in commitment, in structure?
And that's B, Judge Wilhelm, the ethicist, the grounded man.
And setting the scene here is so important because this book is deliberately not a traditional philosophy text. It's framed as a collection of papers that were supposedly just found.
Yes, and the sources we have, especially the commentary from Alistair Hannay,
Our translator and editor, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Oslo.
Right. Hannay confirms this twofold motivation behind the whole work. It was deeply personal and intensely philosophical, all at the same time.
The personal side is just crucial to understanding this. Kierkegaard had just broken off his engagement to Regina Olsen.
A huge life-altering event for him.
Absolutely. And you can feel that fateful, painful choice just fueling his relentless exploration of this tension between finite commitment and, infinite freedom. He was basically writing himself out of a personal catastrophe.
And philosophically, he was desperately looking for a weapon. I mean, that's the word he uses. A weapon to confront the dominance of Hegelian thought.
That big, all-consuming system.
Exactly. He was actively searching for a non-systematic critique, a way to affirm individual personal freedom that Hegel's system just seemed to erase.
He thought he'd found an answer in Berlin, didn't he, when he was attending Schelling's lectures?
He did. He had high hopes that Schelling's idea of reality, that it originates from the free action of a personal God, would give him the grounds he needed for existential freedom.
But it was a huge disappointment.
A profound disappointment. He realized very quickly that Schelling's approach wasn't the radical absolute critique he was looking for. It wasn't, as he put it, the double-edged little dagger that could assassinate the whole of reality by forcing a fundamental personal decision.
So what he needed then was this total, absolute confrontation, the thing embodied in the title itself, either.
Precisely. Not a Hegelian synthesis where you combine the two. No, this is a choice that annihilates one option in favor of the other.
Okay, so let's jump right into that bizarre, almost fictional origin story of the book. It all starts not with philosophy, but with the editor, Victor Eremita.
And his discovery of these manuscripts.
The name itself is so interesting, Victor Eremita. It's Latinized.
It suggests victorious hermit, or maybe it's hiding the thought of being in a cloister, someone deliberately set apart from the world.
And he's the one who narrates this accidental discovery of the papers, hidden away inside an old writing desk, an escritoire.
Eremita had bought this beautiful piece of furniture, and he just loved it. It's rich wood, all its clever little secret compartments. And the incident that leads to the discovery is so wonderfully mundane and yet violent at the same time.
It's the summer of 1836. He's rushing, trying to get ready for a week-long trip to the country.
He's running late, the coachman is outside blowing his horn.
And he suddenly realizes his pocketbook is too light. He needs to grab some cash from his money drawer in the escritoire.
But the drawer is stuck. It absolutely refuses to open. He tries everything. All his little tricks and methods fail. And his impatience just escalates into this genuine rage.
A magnificent, totally disproportionate fit of indignation. He actually compares his anger to Xerxes having the sea whipped.
Which is just an incredible image. But what's crucial is his reaction. Instead of, rationally looking for a key or calling a locksmith.
He gives in to pure violence. He grabs a hatchet, and just deals the escritor this tremendous blow, shattering the surface.
And the drawer still doesn't open, but the shock of the blow, the violence itself, causes something else entirely unexpected to happen.
A secret door springs open.
Right, revealing a recess. And inside that recess are the papers that would become either or.
Wait, hold on. So the discovery of what Kierkegaard sees as the path to ultimate selfhood,
Hmm.
this whole confrontation between aesthetic and ethical life, it's framed as a result of a violent, irrational outburst over a lack of money.
Exactly. The sheer contingency, the accident of the discovery, is the perfect frame for work about radical personal choice.
Wow.
The ethical life, the structured life, is revealed through an aesthetic accident, a fit of pure passion. Aramita, even though he's in a hurry, he grabs the papers, throws them in his mahogany pistol case, and takes off. But later, he says he begged the escritoire's forgiveness.
The act of violence reveals the truth, but the rational mind feels guilt. That's a perfect setup.
It really is, and it sets the stage perfectly for the physical contrast between the manuscripts themselves, which just mirrors the whole philosophical divide between the two unknown authors.
Okay, so what did these documents actually look like?
They were two radically different bodies of work. A's writings, the aesthete stuff, they were these physical objects of, you could say, fleeting beauty. They were on letter vellum, often with really elegant, though sometimes careless handwriting.
Wide margins, a concern with form.
Very much so. And they contained aesthetic essays, aphorisms, lyrical outbursts.
And of course, the most scandalous part, the seducer's diary. But A makes a point of saying he's only the editor of that diary, not the author.
Precisely. Which creates this Chinese box puzzle, this fascinating literary game where A is editing a seducer named Johannes and Aramita is editing A and B. It just reinforces the aesthete's tendency to never fully own his own actions.
Always keeping that artistic distance, that layer of irony.
Always. And then you have B, Judge Wilhelm, the ethicist, and his papers were the total opposite.
Written on full sheets of foolscap, right? The kind of paper you'd use for official documents.
Exactly. They were even divided into columns, like legal papers. The handwriting was clear, extended, uniform. It looked exactly like that of a businessman or, well, a judge.
And the contents weren't poetic fragments. There were two long, structured ethical arguments and one shorter one, all in the form of letters addressed directly to A.
Structure and commitment defined his very medium.
So Aramita, the editor, he has to call them A and B because he can't find out who they are.
Right, he searches for 5 years, and finds absolutely nothing. The dealer has no records. It was bought at a general auction. He's at a total dead end. He only knows the letter writer's name is Wilhelm, who was a former judge.
And this brings us to the whole purpose of the pseudonyms. Kierkegaard himself said later that they weren't just for hiding. He knew people would figure it out pretty quickly.
No, they were chosen to disclose what he called special signatures, these distinct, comprehensive perspectives on existence.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah.
What does the name Victor Eremita, the editor, disclose?
Well, the very act of being an editor who just finds and publishes these opposing views, it implies a stance of detachment, right? Of being in a cloister removed from the actual choice. Aramita is necessary because Kierkegaard is arguing that he, the author, isn't responsible for the viewpoints. He's just presenting them as total life systems.
And what about someone like Johannes de Silentio, the author of Fear and Trembling?
His name means John of Silence, and he writes about something he claims you can't intelligibly speak of, like the paradox of Abraham's faith. So the pseudonym itself reflects the limits of language and reason when you're confronting the religious dimension.
So the pseudonym defines the thought experiment. It's designed to stop the reader from just blending the positions together.
Absolutely. You can't merge A and B. They have to remain distinct voices, forcing you, the reader, to choose one perspective or maybe realize that both are insufficient and you have to look somewhere else entirely.
And the most profound structural trick to ensure this lack of synthesis is Aramita's observation that the papers have no ending.
Precisely. There's no historical closure. We never find out if A repented and became ethical. We don't know if B successfully converted him or if maybe B got bored with his ethical life and drifted towards A's freedom.
And Victor calls this lack of an ending a piece of good fortune.
Because it frees the reader from caring about the finite results. You're forced to confront the views themselves. You don't get the satisfaction of knowing who won. You only get the unsettling pressure of the choice.
Which brings us to the final, amazing detail of this whole preface. The two hypothetical messages the editor imagines the authors might give the reader. A's message is just pure aesthetic cynicism.
Read them or don't read them, you will regret both.
It's the perfect expression of that worldview, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every possible choice leads to dissatisfaction. So the only truly aesthetic action is just to wittily observe the paradox.
While B's advice is this masterpiece of ethical instruction, and it's directed specifically at a lady reader, he says, "My fair reader, in this book you will find something you ought perhaps not to know.
That's part one, A's papers.
And something else you might well profit from knowing."
B's letters, part two.
And the instruction for how to read it is unbelievably complex.
You have to read the aesthetic part in such a way that you who have read it can be as the one who has not read it.
And the ethical part, in such a way that you who have read it can be as though one who has not forgotten what has been read.
So what does that actually mean? You have to erase the seductive part from your memory, but internalize the ethical part completely.
It captures the moral danger of the aesthetic life perfectly. You have to understand the seduction in order to reject it, but you have to reject it so completely that it leaves no stain, no lingering desire for that dangerous freedom. Meanwhile, you have to absorb the ethical life so completely it becomes foundational, unforgettable. This whole complex instruction just sets the entire tone for the confrontation to come.
Okay, let's step fully into the world of author A. This is the figure who embodies the pursuit of the interesting, and his whole existence is dedicated to what he calls living poetically.
Which requires a completely different relationship with time and reality than what, most of us have.
It does. A's life is this constant attempt to elevate existence itself to the level of art. And the key way he does this is through his diary.
Right, and we learn it's not an indicative diary, it's not a historically exact narrative of what happened. Instead, it's written in the subjunctive mood.
Okay, let's break that down. What does that mean in practical terms for him?
It means he describes an experience as if it's taking place in the very moment he's writing about it, even if it happened years ago. By constantly reproducing the experience in this semi-poetic way, he gives his own past a quality of immediate, fresh possibility.
So he's not just remembering, he's re-editing his own past. He's making sure his life retains the texture of art and avoids the dull, fixed nature of committed history.
He needs that artistic distance. He has to have it because he views the actual age he's living in with such profound contempt.
His critique of his era is just relentless, isn't it? He complains that it's paltry and without passion. He sees modern life as being watered down, lacking intensity, just incapable of true extremes.
He argues that people's thoughts are thin and flimsy as lace, and their desires are stodgy and sluggish. They are, at the end of the day, spiritual small-time hucksters who think they can get away with cheating God just a little bit.
Living life with petty calculation instead of grand passion.
This is exactly why his soul constantly goes back to the Old Testament and to Shakespeare. And why? Because there, at least, people hate, people love, people murder their enemy. Their people sin.
He finds modern people incapable of even a proper, grand, tragic sin.
Exactly. Sin has become cheapened. It's just a mistake, a miscalculation, rather than a passionate, defining act of freedom.
And what's the engine behind this desperate need for passion and aesthetic games? It's the demonic force of boredom.
Ion is crystal clear on this. Idleness, what he calls otium, is a truly divine way of life, but only if you're not bored. The gods on Olympus were happily idle.
But boredom. That is the absolute root of all evil. It's far more dangerous than just being lazy or lustful.
He describes it as demonic pantheism, a force that soaks into everything and has this magical power of repulsion. It sets everything in motion just to avoid the static horror of tedium.
He even has this meticulous classification of the bored. He splits them into two major groups.
First, you have the plebeians, the masses. They are the ones who bore others. These are the constantly busy, always restless people whose activity is just noise.
And then there's the nobility, the elect. These are the people who bore themselves.
And Emily says these are the people who generally amuse others. They're the ones with enough interior life to actually recognize the horror of repetition.
The deeper their self-boredom, the more radical their amusement for other people becomes.
And when this self-boredom hits its absolute peak, they provide the most radical amusement of all, either passively by dying of boredom or actively by shooting themselves out of curiosity.
Wow. The drive to escape tedious reality is the engine of his entire project.
And the absurdity of this anti-boredom crusade even pushes him into this spectacular satirical digression on political theory. He argues that modern politicians just make things worse by proposing boring stuff like constitutional assemblies or savings plans.
He finds value only in the completely frivolous. His counterproposal for Denmark is just Wild. Take out a 15 million loan
A huge sum.
and use the entire thing not to pay debts, but exclusively for public pleasure.
And we're not talking about a few fireworks here.
No, we're talking free theater, free access to streetwalkers, free drives in the park, even free burial with a free eulogy.
And his argument is that this opulence, this total commitment to pure aesthetic joy, would attract the world's wealth artists, actors, dancers, and it would turn Copenhagen into another Athens.
It just shows the aesthete's total contempt for consequential reality, political economy, debt, social structure. It's all just boring. The only true value is in the immediate, beautiful appearance.
And he takes this political absurdity even further with his idea of the balance of power.
He suggests kidnapping the Shah of Persia and selling him to the Turks. And he claims that Denmark, through this one insane act, would instantly hold the balance of power in Europe.
And how does he justify this? He says he knows this kind of fortunate existence from his own tiny personal experience. He confesses, "I was once the balance of power in a family and could do as I pleased. It was never I that suffered, always the others."
That is the essence of the aesthete right there. He projects his own detached, fragmented life, being the center of attention without any consequence, onto the vast stage of Europe. The whole world is just a theater for his personal amusement.
It's philosophical speculation as pure entertainment. The outcome doesn't matter, only the witty idea.
Let's pivot to his reflections on sensuality and its mediums, because this gives us a crucial insight into why he prefers music and the fleeting desire it represents.
He focuses on how Christianity, by defining the spiritual, also accidentally defined the sensual as its opposite. It posited sensuality as a principle that had to be excluded.
So sensuality becomes a power in itself precisely because it's the thing that's forbidden.
Exactly. And this spiritual definition is essential for the seducer because it gives his pursuit a heightened, almost religious intensity. He then draws this distinction between art forms based on their medium's relationship to the sensual.
Take language, for instance, the medium of literature, of ethics. In language, he says, the sensual aspect is reduced to a mere instrument, and it has to be constantly negated.
For communication to be perfect, the sensual part has to disappear. We only speak well when we stop noticing the movements of our tongue and mouth. We only read well when we're not fixated on the shape of the individual letters.
So language becomes the perfect medium for ethical thought when everything sensual about it is negated.
But music is different. For him, it's the highest aesthetic medium. It appeals to the ear, which A calls the instrument by which inwardness is grasped.
Music holds desire in a state of quiet melancholy. He says it's a state of possession without having desired it. The desire is quiet because it never fully awakens into commitment.
And why the ear? Why is that the instrument for inwardness? It's because the ear receives sound, which is ephemeral, non-visual. Sight fixes an object in space and time, makes it concrete, subject to ethical reality. But the ear, it grasps the fleeting, the internal emotional movement, the mood, without needing to pin the object down.
This whole aesthetic theory basically justifies his entire life project, to seek desire without possession, inwardness without commitment. The seducer has to embody this fleeting, melancholy desire.
Which leads us directly to the most famous section of the book, The Seducer's Diary, where A, or Johannes, documents his tactical courtship and ultimate abandonment of a young woman named Cordelia.
This is A in his most concentrated form, isn't it? Pure, focused, predatory aesthetic mastery.
Yes, and his goal is not the vulgar, immediate conquest. His goal is the aesthetic capture of the moment, the creation of a beautiful, tragic memory.
To do this, he first aims to reduce the significance of the female sex in Cordelia's eyes. He adopts the character of a bachelor, talking only about comfortable ease, a reliable servant, and good friend.
He's trying to subtly outrage her by destroying the poetry of her gender, provoking a reaction that he can then manipulate.
The ultimate aesthetic goal is surprise. He writes that he can't just be an observer. He has to be on the alert, ready to manipulate the environment. But the surprise has to come from something quite ordinary.
Something ordinary that, through his subtle intervention, gradually appears surprising.
And what does that surprise achieve? He says it suspends the energy of the one concerned, makes it impossible for her to act.
It paralyzes her will. It makes her a perfect object for his aesthetic management.
The anecdote of the sad glance is a perfect example of this low-level psychological manipulation. He meets a lady on the street, casts this sorrowful glance at her, takes off his hat, and in an agitated, dreamy voice claims she looks just like someone he loves who is far away.
It's a completely theatrical, almost insane move. He knew she would think he was an extravagant dreamer, and she'd dare to smile at him out of curiosity and pity.
And that smile, he records, gained him a footing. Days later, he greets her, and she laughs. He has successfully inserted himself into her reality as this poetic, tragic figure, not as a real man.
The deception is the art. When he finally engineers the engagement to Cordelia, which he only sees as an external obstacle to be navigated, he writes her a letter claiming he's been changed by her presence. But in his diary, he immediately admits his utter duplicity.
He writes that he is not changed. Instead, he is fashioning for myself a heart in the likeness of her own. He sees himself as a spiritual sculptor.
And that analogy is key. He says he's secretly stealing her heart like Rebecca stole Laban's household gods. Rebecca stole the idols, the very foundation of Laban's home, while pretending to be a dutiful daughter. Johannes is doing the exact same thing, stealing the foundation of Cordelia's selfhood under the guise of commitment.
For A, the engagement is just an external bond that gets in the way of true aesthetic love. His real goal isn't the relationship, it's the capture of the exalted mood of the courtship, which has to be perfectly concluded with abandonment before reality can set in.
He needs contradictions in Cordelia's life, so his own self-contradictions, saying he's changed while plotting his exit will go unnoticed. His whole life is just a series of approach runs, never actually committing, always ready with a witty interpretation that can change everything.
He throws hope overboard to live artistically because, as he says, hope is a faithless steersman. He wants to remember everything, but he has to avoid the fixity, the accountability of commitment. That fixity is the death of the aesthetic.
And now we have to make the difficult transition to Judge Wilhelm, author B. His voice is grounded, stable, and completely antithetical to A's elegant fragmentation.
And his sources are these letters written on those official legal sheets, reflecting the order he brings to life.
Wilhelm is the voice of grounded existence. He's a judge, a married man, content in his home. He feels his vocation, his duty is what develops his personal being. His work is important for himself and for the community he serves. He just cannot understand how time could be a burden for anyone. For him, it's a true blessing.
And his central philosophical project is to critique A's lifestyle, which he argues is fundamentally despair, whether A knows it or not.
He makes a really sharp philosophical point here. He says, if all things are transitory, discovering that fact isn't in itself a reason to despair, unless you were already in despair to begin with.
So A's problem, his despair in thought, is that he's seen through the vanity of everything, but crucially, he hasn't moved any further. He's just stuck there.
He remains constantly beyond himself, refusing to ever occupy his own self.
That sounds like a philosophical dead end. If the aesthetic man sees all commitment as vanity, how does the ethical man break out of that reflective trap?
By choosing the self. To counter A's obsession with the interesting and the ephemeral, B champions energy and the passionate commitment to duty, he argues that this commitment is what forms the self. And he roots this entire ethical view back to a childhood memory from when he was 5 years old.
The famous story of ballet's textbook lines.
Yes. He was assigned to learn the first 10 lines. And he recalls feeling this overwhelming sense of duty, believing that heaven and earth would collapse if he failed. But the key insight is the second half of that feeling. Even if they did collapse, he would still be obligated to learn his lines.
So the origin of the ethical self isn't some grand divine vision, but a small, concrete, self-chosen act of duty that's undertaken with infinite seriousness.
That's it exactly. This is the origin of the self-chosen self. The main thing is energy, which B believes is generative. It develops a good mind. It turns that abstract sense of duty into concrete personal development.
He has that beautiful illustration with the example of a girl.
Right. Let her be silly, hysterical, generally flighty, the very type A would despise. But once she falls deeply in love, she suddenly develops this shrewd and cunning intelligence in finding out if her love is returned.
So love, even romantic love, forces the self to act, to focus, to overcome aesthetic distraction.
The energy transforms her. It proves that duty and seriousness are generative forces, not stifling burdens.
And this allows B to just forcefully attack A's frivolous use of either, the aesthete's motto. Do it or don't do it. You will regret both.
For B, that mockery just reveals how loose the joints of your soul are.
Wilhelm warns A that life won't always let him just hover above the choice. He says life's circumstances will one day strap you on their rack and force a real, serious choice.
Youth has a choice, a real etherer. And maturity means developing one's personality, one's enduring structure, not just one's mind, which is exactly what A avoids doing.
And the central commitment B champions is marriage. He dedicates a huge part of his letter to its ethical vision, calling it life's deepest form of revelation.
He argues against the aesthetic search for the uncommon girl with uncommon qualities. He contrasts his own marriage with a friend's expectations, who had hoped to find a prodigy to secure his aesthetic future.
B admits he had to make do with a girl, just like any other, just as he was a person, just like any other. And this is profoundly significant.
It is. He found profound happiness and stability in the ordinary. He confesses that the prodigy his friend was looking for would have been too much for him.
The ethical life grounds itself in reality, in the concrete, and the stability of the ordinary, while the aesthetic life chases the fantasy of the uncommon.
It takes more courage and confidence, in B's view, to choose the ordinary and build something lasting than to constantly chase the interesting.
B then gives this remarkably detailed ethical advice for marriage, starting with a warning against two great errors: despotism, treating the wife like a slave, and something he calls misplaced solicitude.
That idea of misplaced solicitude is particularly interesting. It's the patronizing idea that woman is weak, she cannot endure sorrow and anxiety. The weak and frail must be handled lovingly.
B completely rejects this. He says falsehood. Falsehood. The woman is just as strong as the man, maybe stronger.
He argues that this misplaced solicitude actually humiliates the woman by robbing her of her necessary participation in the ethical life.
True ethical love, B insists, involves total confidence. The man has to confide everything. If the man lacks the strength to share the ethical burden, then it's he who is weak, not the woman.
A shared strength is required for the ethical relationship.
And B goes even further. He elevates woman to a primary source of salvation, stating his conviction that of 100 men who go astray in the world, 99 are saved by women, one by a direct divine grace.
He believes it's man's nature to go astray, and woman's nature to remain in the pure and innocent peace of immediacy.
But this praise is then immediately set against his very strong opposition to the emancipation of women, which is of course a highly charged topic, and we need to be careful to contextualize it within Wilhelm's strict ethical framework.
Yes, we have to report impartially on Wilhelm's view as it's presented in the source. He sees emancipation as a dangerous doctrine conceived by what he calls half-men who lack the constitution to be men themselves. So, why does he feel this way?
For Wilhelm, woman's perfection lies precisely in her imperfection, her clarifying finiteness. The aesthetic man sees this as a limit to be transcended. The ethical man sees it as her essential strength.
He argues that woman's life must be concealed and clandestine, as is always the life of the root.
Ah, the root analogy. The root is the life-giving, stable part of the plant. It's necessary for its visible growth, but it has to remain unseen, grounded, and defined by its limits.
Exactly. For a woman to seek emancipation in the category of man, to become visible and exterior in the way a man is, would be an irreparable loss for her in his view. It would make her nothing more than prey to man's fleeting whims, losing the grounded strength she currently possesses.
So from Wilhelm's perspective, for the ethical ideal to function, these gender roles have to be stable and defined by duty, however restrictive that might seem to us today.
Ultimately, Wilhelm's life is about dependability. He offers his testimony to A, saying, "You can safely build upon it." In contrast to A's existence, which is a constant swirling of possibilities, Wilhelm offers a concrete ethical foundation.
Okay, so now we circle back to the aesthete, A, but in a profoundly different light. Wilhelm's critique leads us into this dangerous transition area between the aesthetic and the ethical.
A's highest intellectual interest, ironically, is sorrow. He claims that life's real meaning is sorrow, and so being the unhappiest is the happiest thing of all.
It's aestheticized misery. He's trying to find beauty and meaning in suffering itself, but Wilhelm warns that this whole area is treacherous. It's a place where the soul is easily seduced by theories of predestination, the idea that suffering is just fated.
Instead of being confronted ethically as a result of a choice, to expose the fraudulence of this aesthetic sorrow, Wilhelm draws a crucial distinction between immediate sorrow and reflective sorrow. This is one of the most clinically insightful sections of the whole book.
Immediate sorrow sounds straightforward enough.
It is. Immediate sorrow has a clear external cause. A death, unrequited love, a bad circumstance. It's manageable, relatable, and it can be represented beautifully in art. Its sacred script is stamped in the external, beautiful and clear, and legible by all, like the image on Veronica's handkerchief. Everyone can see the tragedy, and that recognition provides a kind of compensatory calm.
But reflective sorrow, that's something far darker.
Reflective sorrow is rooted in deception or betrayal, not external loss. It's an internal consuming unrest that prevents any peaceful, beautiful exterior expression. The interior consumes the exterior, meaning the outward appearance becomes entirely accidental and insignificant compared to the inner turmoil.
And because it has no external, clear, beautiful form, reflective sorrow can't be expressed in art. The necessary element of beauty is gone.
We see this played out in the case study of Marie Beaumarchais, who was betrayed by a man named Clovigo. Her sorrow is reflective because she wasn't abandoned by fate or death, but by betrayal, by a deceitful choice. Her pain can't find calm because she's constantly searching for the object of her sorrow.
The interrogation under torture.
Exactly. She just cycles through this endless doubt. Was he a malicious deceiver? Or was he just strong enough to leave her? This ceaseless internal interrogation prevents her from ever settling the case.
Her life becomes an anxiety over how to support her soul, because the very foundation of her love, the thing that should have sustained her, has lost its power because of the deception.
She becomes immured alive, lost to the world, yet constantly searching for a way out. She seeks solitude, but only to rest from forcing her outward appearance into some kind of definite, calm form. Or she seeks noise and distraction music, conversation, so that everyone's attention is directed elsewhere, allowing her to be safely occupied with her internal, fruitless interrogation.
Wilhelm details this internal torment. She brings out every single detail, his voice, his words, and examines it like a judge. But just as she's about to deliver a verdict on Clovigo, she breaks off the examination, finds a phrase like, "he is coming back," and the interrogation is postponed, only to start all over again later.
This endless, fruitless internal interrogation prevents her from achieving even the illusion of sorrow that might bring her some compensatory calm. Her sorrow remains an infant child with its wail, a child without father and mother, because her love was destroyed by a deliberate act of deceit, not torn away by objective fate.
This tragic state, which is caused by the lack of an ethical foundation, reinforces B's ultimate argument. A can't just choose not to despair. The aesthetic life inherently leads to this despair in thought and this reflective misery, and that demands a fundamental, painful move towards a higher form of existence.
And that higher form is glimpsed in the sermon that's appended as the last word, the ultimatum to Judge Wilhelm's letter. And the thought is this: against God, we are always in the wrong.
Why is this leave necessary? The ethical life, as stable and dependable as Wilhelm describes it, still relies on human relationships and finite choices. It grounds the self, but it can't fully absolve that reflective despair or the anxiety caused by human deceit.
The religious leap provides the absolute ground the self requires. It demands the ethical courage to assign everything, our suffering, even our apparent righteousness, to sin. And Wilhelm notes that philosophy, being too aesthetic, is incapable of taking this step.
We see this through the example of the young woman who was betrayed by a lover. She loved him totally, but his betrayal ultimately put her in the right against him. But being right against the deceiver offers no peace. It just confirms her suffering and the vanity of her love.
Her soul finds peace and happiness only when it turns to the infinite. She desires to love God in such a way that she is always in the wrong against him. This desire assures her devotion is justified and absolute, freeing her from the anxious doubt and fruitless interrogation that consumed Marie Beaumarchais.
So by accepting absolute responsibility that she is perpetually flawed before the absolute, she gains peace. It's a paradox. Total submission grants absolute freedom from existential anxiety.
Finally, Wilhelm distinguishes this ethical seriousness from the aesthetic detachment of the mystic. He critiques the mystic's life as having movement but lacking continuity or development. He compares it to the history of a plant.
The mystic seeks only erotic love or contemplative virtues, becoming too importunate with God, constantly demanding an immediate connection.
They disdain the reality God placed them in, the world of work, duty, and marriage seeking, only to merge with the divine immediately. The ethical man, by contrast, lives with intention and commitment. He accepts the reality of existence and realizes that to obey is better than sacrifice.
His prayer has intention. His life has continuity. He's grounded in the world of human commitment, even while taking the religious step towards accepting his ultimate wrongness before God. The leap isn't away from the ethical, but through it.
What a deep dive that was. We've seen A's world poetic, fragmented, driven by the tyranny of boredom, using seduction to constantly reproduce experience aesthetically, all of it symbolized by those elegant, fleeting manuscripts.
And we've seen B's world grounded in duty, stability, energy, and commitment, rooted in the solemn reality of marriage and the serious choice of selfhood, symbolized by those clear, columnar legal documents.
And we watched B's ethical argument expose A's aesthetic freedom as, ultimately, a form of debilitating despair and thought.
The value of this entire literary experiment, as Kierkegaard's commentator Clemicus noted, is that it's a necessary reminder of what it was to exist as human beings. The ruthless juxtaposition of these two total life views forces you, the reader, to acknowledge the reality and the pain of making an absolute choice.
This is the core insight for anyone trying to get informed on existentialism. True knowledge of self requires confrontation, not synthesis. This deep dive into these sources forces us to recognize the most profound systems of thought are often not about what is true, but about what must be chosen.
And the final great provocation remains, and it ties the philosophy right back to the man himself. While Judge Wilhelm presented the ethical life as the deepest form of revelation, we know that Kierkegaard, the actual author, failed conspicuously to live up to that ideal.
He broke his engagement. He remained the exception.
His later life and his deathbed regrets about not having married or held an official position, they raise the ultimate question of selfhood. Is true selfhood found in the stable, dependable, ordinary existence of Wilhelm's marriage?
Or does it require the painful existence of the exception, the martyr status, that Kierkegaard sought in his public life?
The ambiguity of the ending, that Aramita never found out who won, forces us to confront the possibility that maybe the aesthetic man's perspective, the man committed only to the interesting, holds a lingering, terrifying truth about the human condition.
It leaves us with the same haunting questions that A's voice posed, questions that reflect the deepest existential anxiety even after the ethical path has been laid out for us. Who is the happiest except the unhappiest? And what is life but madness? It's a choice, an either-or, that you are still facing long after the pages of the book are closed.